Saturday dinners at my parents' house had a rhythm so familiar I could practically set my watch to it. Dad would be in his recliner when I arrived, remote in hand, the muted TV flickering in the background. Mom would be bustling between the kitchen and the dining room, shooing me away if I offered to help, insisting I just relax as though that was possible in this house. The oak table was already set when I walked in, same patterned plates, same slightly frayed placemats. Dorian and Marla were seated across from each other, Marla's hair and makeup flawless as always, her phone face down beside her wine glass like it was resisting the urge to check in. Dorian was grinning in that way that usually meant trouble was about to follow. We'd barely made it through the salad when he dropped it. "I've decided to sell the apartment," he said, leaning back like he'd just announced a vacation plan. "We're going to open our own place. A gourmet fusion burger bar, craft buns, locally sourced toppings. The works." Mom's fork clinked against her plate. "Oh, that's wonderful." "Honey," she exclaimed, eyes shining. Dad nodded with a smile that could have doubled as a campaign poster. Marla rested a manicured hand on Dorian's arm, her expression warm, almost smug. "We've found this perfect spot on Madison Street. It's going to be amazing." I froze mid-bite. "You're selling your apartment, the one Grandma Evelyn left you?" "It's an investment," Dorian said, his tone edged with impatience. "You have to take risks if you want rewards." I set my fork down. "Have you considered taking a business loan instead? That way you keep the property as an asset in case things don't work out." Dorian gave a short laugh. "This is why you've always played it safe. Cambria. You're too afraid to live a little." Mom jumped in before I could respond. Now, let's not get into one of your debates. It's a lovely idea, and we should support it." I took a sip of water, forcing a smile I didn't feel. The rest of the meal passed in fits of small talk, but every word felt thin, every laugh rehearsed. Dorian spoke of menus and social media strategies. Marla added bits about decor and branding, and my parents soaked it all in like gospel. By dessert, I'd stopped contributing entirely. I kept picturing the apartment, the polished wood floors, the balcony that caught the evening light, and wondered how long it would take before they realized what they were giving up. When I left that night, the echo of their excitement stayed with me all the way home, along with the quiet certainty that I'd just witnessed the start of something that would end badly. Driving home from dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about the apartment. It wasn't just a piece of real estate, it was the crown jewel of Grandma Evelyn's estate, and she'd chosen to give it to Dorian. I still remembered the day her will was read. Dorian was beaming before the attorney had even opened the envelope, as if he knew what was coming. He got the downtown penthouse with its skyline views and marble counters. I got a modest 2-bedroom on the east side, older, quieter. Nothing to brag about, but mortgage-free. Grandma had pulled me aside afterward, her hand cool in mine. "You've always valued stability over flash." She'd said, "This place will keep you safe." I didn't resent her choice, but even then, I knew she was giving Dorian a gift he could turn into either a legacy or a disaster. The pattern had been set long before that day, as kids. If Dorian wanted something badly enough, the whole house bent around his will. When Mom bought him the wrong color bike, he cried until she exchanged it. When Dad said no to a second pair of designer sneakers, he staged a hunger strike until the box showed up. If I ever protested, I was told I was being dramatic or jealous by the time we were teenagers. Dorian's whims were treated like family projects. Dropping out of college to find himself, Mom said it was brave. Spending 3 months' rent on a motorcycle he didn't know how to ride. Dad called it living while you can. If I questioned him, the room would go cold. I learned early to keep my life separate. My apartment might not have a doorman or a balcony, but it was mine outright. I'd built my career carefully, moving from junior analyst to senior financial analyst at a firm where I actually liked my coworkers. My days had a rhythm work. Gym, dinner, a book, or some late-night market research for the promotion I was eyeing. Still, Seeing Dorian throw away a safety net most people would envy tugged at something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't envy. Not exactly. It was the weight of knowing how our family worked and how this would play out if things went wrong. And if I was right. It wouldn't be long before going wrong became the next dinner table topic, 2 months later. An invitation arrived in my inbox with gold lettering and a sleek logo, Ellis & Co. Burgers, grand opening. Madison Street was prime territory lined with trendy cafes and bars that had waiting lists just to get a table. When I stepped inside that Saturday evening, I had to admit it looked impressive. The space had been completely transformed exposed brick walls, pendant lights casting a warm glow, polished concrete floors. Tables were already full, servers weaving between them with trays of cocktails and plates stacked with towering burgers. An herb garden lined the front windows, a small but clever touch that gave the air a fresh scent. Dorian was in his element, moving from group to group like a politician at a campaign party. Marla stood near the bar in a fitted emerald dress, chatting with a couple I recognized from Dad's Rotary Club. Mom and Dad were planted right in the center of it all, beaming as if they owned the place. This is exactly what we always knew Dorian was capable of. Dad was telling Uncle Mark, his voice carrying over the music. Takes vision. You know not everyone has that entrepreneurial drive. Mom leaned in, adding with a little tilt of her head, some people are just leaders. Others, well, they're more comfortable following. She didn't have to glance my way for the meaning to land. I found a spot near the appetizer table and busied myself with a plate, letting their words slide past like they had for years. When Dorian finally spotted me, he swept over, champagne in hand. Cam, you made it. He air-kissed my cheek. What do you think? It's beautiful, I said honestly. And it was. The design, the menu, the atmosphere on the surface. It was perfect. I hope it's a huge success. He grinned. It will be. This is just the start. I nodded, offering a smile I'd practiced long ago. He was still buzzing with the thrill of launch night, and nothing I said, no caution, no reminder of overhead or competition would have registered. As the evening wore on, I mingled politely, accepted a glass of wine, and let the hum of conversation wash over me. But beneath the polished veneer of the restaurant, I could already feel it that quiet, unshakable sense that this shine wouldn't last forever. The weeks after the grand opening settled into a new rhythm. Every Sunday dinner at my parents' house became, unintentionally, a business update meeting for Ellis & Co. Burgers. Dorian would arrive with a flourish, sometimes with Marla, sometimes solo, and hold court at the table. He spoke of expanding the menu, hiring more staff, and even hinted at a second location. He painted it all in broad. Bright strokes always soon and next quarter, but never once mentioned numbers. One evening, between bites of roast chicken, I asked lightly, "So, how's revenue looking? Are you hitting your projections?" Dorian didn't miss a beat. "We're building momentum," he said, waving his fork like a baton. "It's about brand presence right now, not the ledger. That's important." I agreed, but sustained cash flow. Marla's laugh cut me off. "Cam, you'd turn a wedding toast into a balance sheet." I let it go. The room was already thick with that edge that came whenever I asked questions they didn't want to answer. Halfway through dessert, Marla put her spoon down and clasped her hands dramatically. "We have news," she said, her smile wide. "Baby number 3 is on the way." Mom gasped, her eyes filling instantly. "Oh, Marla." Another grandchild. She was on her feet to hug them. Dad thumped Dorian on the back. Beaming, I set my fork down carefully. "Congratulations. Are you sure this is the best timing with the restaurant still getting established and everything?" The shift was immediate. The warmth in the room evaporated. Mom turned toward me, her voice sharper than the carving knife beside the ham. "A baby is always a blessing, and maybe you'd understand that if you had any children of your own, or a husband," Dad added, almost as an afterthought. but it stung all the same. Marla leaned back, still smiling, but her eyes glinted. Not everyone needs to plan life like a spreadsheet. Cam. I said nothing more. The congratulations continued around me, but I couldn't shake the image of Dorian juggling late-night feedings and payroll crises, if the cracks were already forming. A third child would only widen them. And soon enough, those cracks would be impossible to ignore. Emily was barely 2 weeks old when I stopped by my parents' house one afternoon and found Dorian alone in the kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee like it might have answers. The exhaustion on his face was impossible to miss dark circles under his eyes, a beard growing unevenly along his jaw. "How's the restaurant?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He hesitated before answering. "It's not where we thought it would be." He rubbed his forehead. "We've gone through 3 head chefs in as many months. Nobody likes Mike's menu changes, and suppliers are holding invoices longer than they should. Some bills are stacking up." It was the first time he'd dropped the act around me, and I almost wished he hadn't. "Have you thought about scaling back the menu?" Streamlining his shoulders stiffened. "We just need the right team. Once that's in place, we'll bounce back. Later." When I mentioned it to Mom over the phone, she dismissed it with a chuckle. "Every new business has rough patches. Your brother's just finding his footing." Dad echoed the same line when I saw him that Sunday. But the next dinner told me more than their words ever could. Dorian's updates were shorter, vague enough to pass for optimism if you didn't listen closely. Marla, dressed to perfection as always, filled the silence with bright chatter about marketing ideas and upcoming specials. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes darted toward him every time she spoke, as if gauging his reaction, between bites of roast beef. I watched the space between them not in their seating, but in the way they seemed to orbit separate worries. Whatever was happening behind the counter at Ellis & Co. was growing heavier by the day, and neither of them seemed ready to admit how close it might be to breaking. By the time dessert was served, I knew it was only a matter of time before those quiet confessions turned into public ones. By early spring, the decline was impossible to dress up. The once busy burger bar sat half empty most nights, the lunch crowd a memory. The Instagram page that had once been filled with glossy photos of towering burgers and smiling patrons now posted sporadically mostly bland specials and awkward reposts from customers. When the news came that their main investor had pulled out, I wasn't surprised. Without that safety net, the debts began stacking faster than they could pay them. Vendors started demanding payment before deliveries. Rent was late. Payroll became a juggling act. I heard most of it secondhand small admissions from Dorian when he caught me alone. Snippets from my parents' phone calls where their voices were low and urgent. Then, one rainy Thursday, he admitted the inevitable. "We're selling," he said over the phone. The words flat. "The offer isn't great, but it'll keep us from losing the equipment to repossession." The sale went through in less than 2 weeks. The price barely covered the business debts. The bank loan remained a 6-figure weight with no income to counter it. The rental they'd been living in was next to go. 2 days later, my phone rang again this time. "Mom, we need you to come over Saturday," she said. Her tone clipped, almost formal. "Family meeting." I didn't need to ask what it was about. I'd felt this moment building since the first dinner when Dorian announced he was selling the apartment. Still, I agreed, knowing the decision had already been made without me. That Saturday, I drove over under a dull gray sky, the windshield wipers keeping time with my thoughts. When I walked into my parents' dining room, they were all there: Mom, Dad, Dorian, Marla, and the kids. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Dad gestured for me to sit. "We've been talking," he began, his voice taking on the tone he used for pronouncements. I already knew what was coming, but I sat anyway, my hands resting on the edge of the table. Whatever they were about to say, it would be framed as necessity, as the only choice. And I also knew I was about to disappoint them all over again. From the moment I walked into my parents' dining room, I knew something was wrong. Mom was too cheerful. Her voice pitched high as she offered me coffee. Dad's eyes avoided mine, fixed instead on the bread basket. Dorian and Marla sat together at one end of the table, their postures tight, like they were bracing for impact or delivering it. We moved through the first course in an uneasy quiet before Dad cleared his throat. "Cambria, we've been talking, and we've come to a decision." Mom jumped in before I could respond. "Your brother and his family need a place to stay for a while, and you've got that nice apartment. Plenty of room." Dorian leaned forward, cutting her off. "It's just you in there. You've got a second bedroom you don't even use. We'd only need it temporarily." "How long is temporarily?" I asked. Marla gave a non-committal shrug. "Until Dorian finds the right position. Obviously. I can't work with the baby and the other two to manage." Dorian's voice hardened. "I'm not flipping burgers somewhere. I need an executive-level role. That takes time." It was clear they'd already mapped out the plan and my role in it. My parents were nodding along, as if this was a formality. "No," I said. The silence was sharp. Mom's face went red. "They're your family. How can you be so heartless?" Dorian shot back. "You've always been selfish." "Cam. Always. This is why Grandma left me the apartment she knew you'd never step up." And then Dad slipped, his tone defensive. "We told him you wouldn't mind. We said it was fine." The words hit harder than any insult. They'd already promised my home before asking me. I pushed my chair back. "You made promises you had no right to make. I'm not responsible for fixing this. Not now. Not ever." Their voices rose as I walked out, but I didn't stop. I already knew they weren't finished. The calls started that night. Mom's voice trembled with righteous indignation, demanding to know how I could sleep knowing my own flesh and blood might be homeless. By morning, my voicemail was full Dad lecturing about family duty, Dorian swinging between pleading and cursing, Marla sending long texts about how I was punishing the children for the sins of the parents. When I blocked their numbers, the messages shifted to email, then Facebook. Then came distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years, parroting lines about compassion and loyalty. It was exhausting, but not surprising. I decided to prepare for the inevitable. The next day, I called a locksmith. By evening, both doors had new locks, the spare keys useless. I booked a security company to install cameras at the porch, driveway, and back entrance. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security app while I was still at work, motion detected on the front porch. I drove home to find exactly what I'd expected Dorian. Marla and the kids, surrounded by suitcases and plastic bins. Dorian was at the door, jiggling a key in the new lock. He turned when he saw me pull into the driveway. "This isn't funny," he said. I stepped out of the car. "No, it's not. But neither is showing up uninvited with a key my parents gave you." Marla's voice was sharp. "You can't just leave us out here. You're trespassing," I said evenly. "Leave now, or I call the police." I held up my phone, thumb hovering. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marla began gathering the kids. Dorian grabbed the bags. His glare locked on me. They left without another word. But I knew they'd be back in some form. They always were. The next morning, I called in late to work and spent the day touring rental listings. By noon, I'd found it a clean 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, walking distance to an elementary school, with a small playground in the complex. The landlord hesitated when I explained the tenants would have 3 children, but 6 months' rent paid up front changed his mind. It was a hit to my savings, but one I could live with. Saturday, I drove to my parents' house for breakfast, the apartment keys in my pocket and a folder with the lease terms under my arm. They were all there, Mom, Dad, Dorian, Marla, and the kids. Conversations trailed off when I walked in. I placed the keys on the table. It's a 3-bedroom on Maple Grove. 6 months' rent is covered. The lease starts Monday. Dorian glanced at the keys but didn't touch them. "That's it?" he asked, voice flat. "That's it," I said. "You have 6 months to get on your feet." "Dorian, that means any job, not just an executive-level role. When the lease is up, it's your responsibility to renew or move elsewhere." "I won't be helping again." Marla's smile was tight, her hand smoothing Emily's hair. "You think throwing money at us makes up for turning your back on family?" I met her gaze. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the kids, so they have a roof over their heads." Dorian muttered something I didn't catch, but I didn't ask him to repeat it. I'd said what I came to say. I left before they could start in again, the sound of their low, heated voices following me out the door. 3 months passed without a word between us, from what I heard through a few persistent relatives. Dorian still hadn't found work, apparently. Anything outside executive level was beneath him. Marla had turned to social media, posting vague complaints about selfish people and the struggles of raising 3 kids without support. My parents were still doing what they'd always done, watching the kids, bringing groceries, cushioning every fall so Dorian never hit the ground. I didn't ask for details, and I didn't respond when they slipped into conversation through third parties. My number stayed blocked, the locks stayed changed, and my focus stayed on my own life. Evenings were no longer filled with tense phone calls or dread before family dinners. I enrolled in an advanced investment management course I'd been eyeing for years, something I'd always put off because there was never enough emotional space to commit. Last week, I got the call promotion to senior portfolio strategist. More responsibility, more autonomy, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd earned it without compromise. I celebrated alone that night, a glass of wine in hand as I looked out over the city from my living room window. The air felt lighter, cleaner somehow, not because life was without problems, but because the problems were finally mine alone to solve. Peace, I realized, isn't free. It's bought with boundaries, with hard decisions, with the willingness to be called cruel by people who mistake access for love, and I'd paid every cent gladly.